Okay, good morning students. Welcome to today's lesson. Today our lesson will be on structured essay questions, specifically on the describe type of questions. Now, this is not new to you because you have actually been doing describe type questions ever since secondary 1. So today's lesson is more of a recap and then for you to actually have hands-on practice on an SEQ. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand is what does a describe type question actually assesses me on? It actually assesses you on two things. So firstly, how well you actually understand your content, and secondly, are you actually able to elaborate on your content points in such a way that is relevant to the question and what it is actually asking for? A describe type question is different from an explain type question simply because an explain type question will require you to actually link your content back to the question. Alright, so this is not what we are doing today. We will not be doing explain type question. We are focusing on the describe type question. So how do you start a describe type SEQ? There are 3 simple steps. Step 1, identify the issue in the question. What is the question actually asking you about? Okay. Step 2, brainstorm on the content. So what kind of content is relevant to answering the question? What has your teacher taught you in class? What have you learned from your notes and your textbook that will be relevant content points to ATQ? Now, I will be using the acronym ATQ pretty often, so it actually stands for answering the question. Step 3. Now that you have brainstormed on the content points, you are going to put them all together and organize your answer. And to do that, there are 2 steps that you should be doing. Step 1, which is your point. Identify the first relevant content point that actually answers the question. And step 2, elaborate on this content point with the use of examples. So are there examples to substantiate your content? A good guide to how much examples or how many examples you should be giving. Okay, a good gauge would be about 2 examples. Now all this is very theoretical and you may not be able to actually understand. So what we're going to do next, we are going to put it into practice. So let's try this out. Earlier on, you have been given a SEQ assignment with this question. Describe 2 reasons for the introduction of constitutional changes in Singapore after 1945. Let's break this down and analyze the question together. Alright, so what is the issue in this question? Okay, you will realize, okay, that it is actually asking you about the reasons for introducing constitutional changes. So that is already step 1, right? Identifying the issue. So let's go on to step 2, where we think about what would be the relevant content points that we have learned. We have learned that there were both external as well as internal developments that actually had an impact on the British decision. External developments include increasing independence movements in other countries, the rise of communist threat, whereas internal developments would include the rise of political consciousness among locals, as well as the loss of British superiority. So right now, okay, we are going to refer to this particular handout. You should have this handout in front of you, and I will need you to actually follow me through as I bring you through it. Okay? Now, the first part here is what I've already done with you earlier on, so we can move straight to look at one sample response together. The content point, okay, that I have chosen, okay, would be the rise of political consciousness. So I start off my answer by saying one of the reasons for introducing constitutional changes in Singapore after 1945 was the rise of political consciousness among the locals. Okay, so this is my first relevant content point. Now, what should I be doing next? Next, I will need to elaborate on my content point as well as substantiate it with the use of examples. Okay, so to elaborate on the rise of political consciousness, I actually can write, for example, before the Japanese occupation, people did not question who or how the government ruled them. However, after the Japanese occupation, some began to think of the future of Singapore and question British superiority. Okay, so this is actually one elaboration and an example. So how do I further elaborate on the people thinking about the future of Singapore? Okay, now this can be done when I actually bring in the point which tells me people started making more demands for changes in the colonial government. So the idea of actually making more demands on the government. So what are examples of this demand? Okay, the fact that there was demand for political involvement, and this is seen, okay, in the increase in the number of political groups that emerge. An example of a political group, okay, would be the Malayan Democratic Union, MDU, and the members of this MDU actually discussed how they wanted Singapore to be governed. Right? Okay, so if we bring this this is just, okay, how one point should be written. So you have the main point, okay, the main reason being the rise of political consciousness, and I actually elaborated on it. So I elaborated on how the rise of political consciousness came about, right, when they started to question British superiority. And then, okay, to elaborate on that, okay, how did they question the superiority of the British? They started making more demands for changes, and an example was seen in the number of political groups that actually emerged. Right, so this is just one paragraph, okay, on one main point. Are you able to follow the lesson thus far? Okay, do you have any questions? Okay, if not, your task for today would be actually to then write out another response, okay, to this question, right? So I've talked about one reason for introducing constitutional change was the rise of political consciousness, and now you have to come up with another point. Okay, so what can you actually be writing on? Okay, you can actually be writing on increasing independence movements in other countries, or you can talk about the rise of communist threat, or you can talk about the loss of British superiority. Whichever point that you choose to write on, okay, remember that you will need to elaborate on it as well as to provide examples that support your elaboration and your main point. Okay? So this handout, okay, will be assigned to you on Google Classroom. Instructions will also be given there, and you will also need to submit your work via Google Classroom as well. Okay, any questions? If you do have any questions, please raise the questions up with your respective subject teachers, and they will be more than willing to actually explain further and actually help you out. Okay, If there are no more questions, I am going to end the podcast here today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will be able to follow the lesson. Thank you, and goodbye for now.